And we're live. Hi everyone, I wanted to introduce you to one of the artists that uses multiple services here at Allusion Studios. This is Mr. Erik Rydberg.
Hey Jim, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So you're introducing your fourth studio album called Twilight's Cold.
Yep.
And congrats on that, by the way.
Thank you.
And we've worked on about 4 albums over time, and in a very hybrid way, in the sense that we're working back and forth using different services. And, to set this up with everybody, Erik is a phenomenal composer and guitarist, and not only classical guitar player, but also metal or, shredder guitar, if you will. Tell me how, you've gotten into the engineering side of this stuff to where you wanted to record your own music.
Well, honestly, I've been interested in it my whole life. I remember back when I was 9 years old, I had a boombox with a cassette recorder in it, and I would lay a rhythm track on one cassette and then play that into another cassette player and then dub something onto that other cassette player. And over the years, I had always been interested in DAWs and, all the way back to the early days of Cakewalk studios and stuff like that. And about, 15 years ago, I paid for some studio time in Salt Lake City to produce a CD. And I was very happy to learn what had gone on, but I walked away from the experience thinking, well, I could have made that sound better if I'd had more control over the situation. So I started getting more invested into learning how to produce the stuff myself, or at least get it into a place where I can start messing with it. Fast forward to about, 6 years ago when you and I first met. By that point, I had already gotten reasonably into some hardware bass lines that would help me get there, and then enter in that first album that you and I worked on together, Jagged, way back when, and was ready by that point to really start learning the pieces and parts of the engineering. I had done a lot of trial by error, right? I wasn't a YouTube guy. I spent most of my time figuring stuff out on my own. So by the time you and I crossed paths, I was ready to start making some progress on some of those things.
Yeah, and with that first album, Jagged, that was basically a rock album, is that correct?
Yeah.
And so you already had pretty much most of the album together, but we were trying to mix, and you were learning engineering techniques and coming to me for that engineering side.
Yep.
And, basically it was student and teacher at that point. But what people have to remember is there's musicality, and there's opinions on what that musicality is and things like that. And so as a teacher, I always try to be very open to what the artist is looking for and not, let's say, pigeonhole you into a certain thing. And then you started a second album, which was 100% solo classical guitar.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about how that transitioned from the first album to the second album.
Honestly, it was a lot easier, right? Because the classical pieces were all solo pieces. So it literally was just me sitting down in front of a mic, banging out a song, and then when it's in the box, trying to figure out where the soundscape was going to lie. As you know, I've gone back and forth about this. I like wide sounds, right? Even in my classical picking guitars, I like wide sounds. So distributing that soundscape to both ears was something that was very important to me. So in a lot of ways, it was easier because all I had to really focus on, other than the basics of cleaning up tracks, if there were any kind of nail strikes or something like that, was the quality of the sound, right?
And in that case, you're talking mainly ambience and stereo spectrum.
Yep.
Now, if we go back to the first album, most of the drum tracks, or maybe all the drum tracks on there, were all, we'll say, digitally created from loops or programs. And then we started working on a third album, These Years, if I'm correct.
Correct.
And that was kind of the area where we started to see a shift, because once you kind of learned that I was able to provide drum tracks, like real drumming on your albums, and you were also able to guide me to say, well, I like this, but can you do this on the cymbals, or can you do that? And you started noticing that, wow, I could get an actual professional drum track done, but still have control of what's happening, obviously within the range of what I'm able and capable to do. But it really started shaping up to creating a little bit more fuller sounding albums, or more organic or musicianship albums, instead of just digital products.
Yeah, later in life, I've been pretty much a solo artist across the board, right? So I started out thinking I was going to crush this whole thing by using looped drums and, synthetic drums and that kind of stuff, samples and whatnot. And the one thing that I learned very quickly in Jagged, using all those loops and samples and all the work that we went through to make those drums sound real, they're good sounding samples, but they didn't sound to your ear as a drummer what they should have been, kind of taught me I needed to consider a different path of more collaboration, which worked out well for both of us, right? Because I got a chance to finally get someone into my loop of making music that up until then was just me, right? I'm
Right.
doing everything myself. I think Mick Fleetwood said it best in Sound City when he said, humans are a lot happier creating with other humans, right?
Absolutely.
Because you get a much better experience walking out the door. So you were laying down the drum tracks for the songs in these years, and then on this recent album, Twilight's Cold, gave me an opportunity to really expand that percussion scape that was somewhat closed before, right? There's a lot more knobs I felt like I could turn in the engineering side when I had real, no kidding drum tracks that I was sitting here helping you put together in the live room next to us.
Well, and the other thing that you kind of miss when you're using loops and stuff like that is the subtleties.
Yeah.
Little tiny
Absolutely.
cymbal splashes or a little tink 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 or a swell or something like that. It brings some kind of human side to the playing. And even if you added that on top of electronic drum, it would add so much more dynamics and stuff to the track.
There's a really famous guy, I forget who it was, but he said guitar music is great because it's the sound between the notes, not the notes themselves. And what you're describing is exactly the same thing with drums. It's that decay, those natural things that you can try like hell with verbs and other stuff in your mixing board to get the samples to do that. It doesn't beat anything like what you get in the studio.
Absolutely.
And that groove, right? You and I were in there when we were working on, I think it was Ghosts of Fury, and you were laying down the tracks based on what we had in here, and I walked in there with a guitar, and we started kind of jamming out with me on the guitar, and it became obvious that feel, that human feel that you get when you're playing drums with something that's already kind of put together, it becomes a more cohesive thing when we're doing it at the same time, as opposed to taking something that's pre-canned and laying some drums to it. Right?
Well, and that was one of the things on that first album that we started putting drums on, is you actually came to me with the mixes. I don't want to say the mixes were done, but all the tracking was done. Like, I was the last thing to fit in there.
Yeah.
And that became really interesting because even though that's awesome to have because I know what all the parts are and I can play with the dynamics within that, I also know that sometimes without having the timing of what the official drums are going to be from that organic drum instead of just the clock, it changes the flow and the feel and the groove sometimes. And so, I suggested to you, well, when you go to write the next album, just give me a rhythm guitar track, maybe, one solo or, some kind of idea, but don't layer 25 tracks of stuff on. Let's get the drums in first, and then let's layer on top of that. So how do you feel that that's changed, the overall process for you and also the end result?
It's completely changed everything for me. So my path to writing a song has now taken a little bit more of a pause, if you will, in the front part. So on Twilight's Cold, I would sit down with acoustic guitar and click out the basic form of the song with an acoustic guitar, just strumming a guitar, right? And I would change things and add and subtract things until I had a structure that I thought I wanted for the vision I had in my head. That's where I stopped, right? I might throw some scratch bass in there, but coming into the studio with you, putting drums on that, a lot of times I can think of at least three of the songs on Twilight's Cold where it took me in a different direction than what I was planning on with the song. And here's a perfect example. On Serendipity, on the breakdown section, I remember sitting right here when you were in the live room playing the drums, and I was telling you over the talkback, I want just some splashy stuff, right? I want some quiet, just an easy tick, if you will, through this section. And you did that a couple of times, and then you gave me one of those, dude, let me try something, right? And then you did that toms thing, and instantly I'm like, that's it. That's the song right there. That sound of those toms, those big fat toms, in that soundscape, just made that song. So
And it was totally opposite of what you thought you were looking
positively, yeah. And it was one of those where I went, wow, I would have never gone there by myself. So
Right.
it kind of goes back to collaborating is a very important part of making music, but it was
Sure.
also my process being a solo artist has kind of changed to I'm not really a solo artist anymore. I'm kind of collaborating with you and on multiple levels, your engineering stuff and you as a pure drummer, right?
Well, and back to my point, if you had all this stuff all figured out, then I'm stuck, and there's, like you're putting the jacket on while I'm trying to play, right? And having these little abilities to change things right in the beginning allows, now I could write the guitar around this, and now it's cooler or whatever. And so it's a fun process to be bouncing off of people, even if it's just a critique or for an opinion or whatever.
Right. I agree. That has worked well for both of us in this joint artistic venture that we had in this last album.
So on the album These Years, when I started drumming with you, that's kind of when the light bulbs start coming on, that there's more opportunities for growth and expansion and a little bit more input and different services that could be used. However, that album was pretty much, already baked, if you will, as like pretty close to the end of the process. Mm-hmm. So this new album that you're just releasing, Twilight's Cold, you kind of took all the things from, engineering, mix consulting, professional drumming, and even production-wise, like how to approach it. Let's get the drums in early. Let's do things like that. And then, of course, mastering. We really used, 5 or 6 services from Allusion Studios to help this album come alive. Tell me a little bit about that process with the nuances of what that did, engineering-wise for you.
So I remember when we were done with These Years, because I play so many different genres and styles of music. I mean, we're talking, on one bookend classical guitar, on the other bookend heavy metal kind of stuff. I can be all over the map creatively with what I do. And before this album, producer-wise, you actually sat me down and said, okay, let's sit down and map out where you're going with this, right? Let's have a plan, a vision, if you will, of the kind and content of music that we're going to lay down in this album before you start, creating and writing and doing that kind of stuff. And in that comment, if you will, to me, this was whatever it was, a year and a half ago, it kind of folded in all of the things that I had worked with you up until that point. Like when we first started doing stuff together, mostly it was just how do you use a compressor, right? How do you effectively use your compressor in your mix and that kind of stuff. And then it turned into soundscape discussions and EQ and sound quality with the classical album. And then in These Years, baking in the real drum sound. That comment about let's map things out kind of put it all together for me in terms of how I could leverage your experience and your abilities drum-wise to really put something, what I feel is very meaningful down on tape for this album. So that aspect of that comment of planning things out really encapsulated all the things that I had learned up until that point from you, and all those facets of music production.
Well, and what's cool for me is, even though I'm heavily involved, you go off and you write more and you put more solos, or you do this or you do that, and then you come back to me and you say, hey, how's this sounding or whatever. And I've been really fascinated with, some of the screaming vocal parts and stuff, even though it's an instrumental album, but there's sound effects and things going on in this album that I'm like, oh, I would have never thought of that. That's awesome, And so it's been a joy for me to kind of watch you, learn and expand, and really, you are learning the art and science of recording, and it's happening, and it's happening the right way, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm proud of everything that you're accomplishing, and of course your composition skills are just freaking amazing. Just totally accomplished. So
with this album, I purposely held off. So in past times, I would write a song and then throw you the song, and then we'd start going back and forth, right? On this album, I purposely withheld everything until everything was done and in the hopper, right? When I had seven fully tracked songs that, in my estimation, were more or less fully mixed, and then we started going back and forth, right? Because I wanted this to be a production of an album, not 7 individual productions of songs, right?
Right.
And I think the answer shows in how the conclusion that we came to with that album. But that was intentional on my part because of that vision comment that you made to me of let's have a whole thing put together, not just individual songs slapped into a CD.
Sure. So tell us about where we could find Twilight's Cold. Can you preview it anywhere? Well,
Sure.
Where's that at?
So right now it's on all the major streaming services. You can go to my website, guitarmusica.com, and I've got all the links and some previews on that album, plus all my previous work, plus some pictures of my studios, my project studio setup, and then some reviews that I have from my previous work from some folks out there in the real world.
Well, that's awesome. Erik Rydberg, everybody, and I'll have all those links in the description below. And like I said, a lot of people, they always think of the studio as I need one service. I need mastering, or I need to record, or I need to do a voiceover, or whatever that is. But honestly, if you use a lot of different services, it might help, blossom your project to something that you didn't expect it could be. And so Erik's just a prime example of that, and I'm really proud of the quality of stuff that we're doing together at this point. So if you need anything from Allusion Studios, feel free to reach out, and have a great day.